Case 1. Sharee Miller, the Internet Black Widow. On a cold November night in 1999, Bruce Miller was working late at his auto salvage yard in Mount Morris Township, Michigan. At 47 years old, the former General Motors employee had built a successful business at B&D Auto Salvage in Flint. He was a hardworking man who typically carried $2,000 in cash. He'd just married his bookkeeper 7 months earlier, a woman named Sharee. He thought he'd found love. He had no idea his new wife had already signed his death warrant. Sharee Paulette Kitley Miller was born on October 13, 1971, in Flint, Michigan. By 1999, the 28-year-old mother of 3 had a talent, a dangerous, deadly talent. She could make men believe anything. And on that November night, her greatest manipulation was about to pay off. The story really begins in the summer of 1999, just months after Sharee and Bruce eloped in Las Vegas on April 23rd. While Bruce was building their future, Sharee was spending her nights in AOL chat rooms, spinning an elaborate web of lies that would eventually trap a man 800 miles away in Missouri. His name was Jerry Cassidy, and he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Jerry Cassidy was 53 years old, a former Kansas City homicide detective. A man trained to spot lies, trained to read people, trained to detect manipulation. And Sharee Miller played him like a violin. Within weeks of meeting online, she'd constructed an entire fictional reality for him. She told him Bruce was connected to the Italian mafia. She told him Bruce beat her regularly. She sent him photographs of bruises she'd carefully created with makeup. She told him she was pregnant with twins. She sent him fake pregnancy tests. She sent him fabricated sonograms. She told him Bruce had caused her to miscarry. Every word was a lie. Every image was fake. But Cassidy believed it all. The manipulation intensified throughout the fall of 1999. Sharee sent Cassidy explicit photos of herself. She wrote detailed emails describing the abuse she claimed to suffer. She spun tales of a violent, dangerous man who wouldn't let her leave. And slowly, methodically, she planted the idea. The only way out was for Bruce to die. On November 7, 1999, the day before the murder, Sharee drove to a rest stop and met Cassidy face to face. She handed him her cell phone and gave him his final instructions. The plan was simple. Kill Bruce at his salvage yard, then call her landline once and hang up. That would be the signal. It was done. November 8, 1999. Jerry Cassidy drove 800 miles from Missouri to Michigan. He found Bruce Miller working alone at B&D Auto Salvage. He raised a 20-gauge shotgun. He fired shots into Bruce's neck and upper back. The 47-year-old husband, the hard-working businessman, the man who'd thought he'd found love, died alone on the floor of his salvage yard. Then Cassidy made the call. One ring. He hung up. Sharee knew Bruce was dead. Initially, police suspected robbery. Bruce did carry that $2,000 in cash, after all. They focused on a former employee named John Hutchinson, who owed Bruce money and was implicated in a VIN-switching investigation. Hutchinson failed a polygraph. It looked like an open-and-shut case. The wrong case. Then, 3 months later, on February 11, 2000, Jerry Cassidy died by suicide in his home in Odessa, Missouri. His brother arrived to clean out the house and found a briefcase hidden under Cassidy's bed. Inside that briefcase was the key to everything. The briefcase contained a suicide note, a full confession to Bruce Miller's murder. But it wasn't a simple confession. It was an accusation. Cassidy wrote that he'd been manipulated, deceived, played by Sharee Miller. The briefcase also contained airline records proving his trip to Michigan, hotel receipts from that November night, computer disks filled with explicit photos Sharee had sent, transcripts of their AOL chats, emails, and most damning of all, detailed murder instructions in Sharee's own words. Just do it and get the hell out of there. The investigation shifted immediately. Police now knew they'd been looking at the wrong suspect entirely. The real killer wasn't John Hutchinson. It was the widow, Sharee Miller, who'd orchestrated everything from behind a computer screen. The trial began on December 12, 2000, in Genesee County Circuit Court before Judge Judith Fullerton. The prosecution laid out a straightforward motive. Sharee wanted Bruce's money, but she knew divorce wouldn't give her enough. So she manipulated a former homicide detective, a man who should have known better, into becoming her personal assassin. The evidence was overwhelming. The emails, the chat transcripts, the photographs, the suicide note, the travel records. The defense argued that Cassiday's suicide note was forged, that John Hutchinson was the real killer, that Sharee had nothing to do with Bruce's death. After 2 days of jury deliberation, the verdict came down, guilty on all charges. Second-degree murder. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. On January 29, 2001, Judge Fullerton sentenced Sharee Miller to life imprisonment for conspiracy and 54 to 81 years for second-degree murder, to be served concurrently. Case closed. Or so everyone thought. The appeals process became a legal odyssey. In August 2008, a federal court overturned her conviction, ruling that Cassiday's suicide note violated the Confrontation Clause, the constitutional right to confront witnesses. Sharee Miller was about to go free. On July 16, 2009, she was ordered released on bond pending a new trial. She walked out of prison on July 17, 2009. She was free for less than 24 hours. Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton immediately rearrested her. The legal battle continued for years. In November 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court vacated the lower court ruling and sent the case back. On August 2, 2012, the district court reinstated her convictions, finding that Cassiday's suicide note had sufficient guarantees of trustworthiness. On February 11, 2014, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed. Sharee Miller's conviction was final. But the most stunning development came in April 2016. From her prison cell, Sharee Miller wrote a 4-page confession letter to Judge Fullerton. After 17 years of maintaining her innocence, she finally admitted the truth. In her letter, she wrote, "Bruce was so close to knowing who I really was, what was really inside of me." She described her online affairs as like a video game, and each man and each relationship was another level to me, seeing how much I could get away with. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't self-defense. It was a game. A game where men were pawns, where manipulation was the objective, and where Bruce Miller's life was just another level to beat. Today, Sharee Miller sits in the Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan, serving a life sentence. The internet black widow who thought she could get away with the perfect murder learned that in the age of digital evidence, nothing stays hidden forever. Every email, every chat, every lie, it's all preserved forever in digital amber, waiting to convict you. Case 2. Diane Louise Spencer. 3 babies, 3 deaths, 2 states. When a baby dies suddenly and unexpectedly, doctors often reach for a diagnosis that offers parents some comfort: sudden infant death syndrome. SIDS. It's tragic, it's unexplainable, but it's natural. No one's fault. But what happens when SIDS occurs twice to the same mother? 3 times? At what point does tragedy become suspicious? At what point do we stop believing in terrible coincidence and start investigating murder? Diane Louise Spencer was born on October 23, 1967. By the time she was 15 years old, she'd run away from home and was living in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania. Young, troubled, and pregnant. On August 6, 1983, when Diane was just 15 years old, she gave birth to a daughter named Joyce Donachik. The baby was healthy. Medical records from Dr. George Mosh documented that just 1 week before her death, 6-week-old Joyce was strong, attentive, and cooperative. But something happened in Diane Spencer's mind. Years later, in her confession, she would tell investigators she didn't think the baby cared about her. There was no interaction. She loved the child, but the baby couldn't return it. 6 weeks after birth, Diane wrapped little Joyce in a towel or blanket, held her close as if cradling her lovingly, and suffocated her own daughter. She held that towel over Joyce's face until the baby stopped breathing, stopped moving, stopped living. Then she called for help. The doctors came. They saw a dead infant. They saw a teenage mother in distress. They saw no signs of trauma, no evidence of abuse. They wrote SIDS on the death certificate and sent Diane home to grieve. No autopsy was performed. No investigation was launched. Joyce Donachik was buried, and everyone believed she died of natural causes. For years past, Diane was now 19 years old. On September 6, 1987, she gave birth to another daughter, Autumn Dawn Spencer. For 15 days, Diane cared for her newborn. And then, On September 21st, 1987, history repeated itself. Baby Autumn fussed in her crib. Diane walked to the crib. She picked up a blanket. She pressed it over her daughter's face. She held it there until Autumn Dawn stopped crying, stopped breathing, stopped living. Again, Diane called for help. Again, doctors saw a dead infant and a distraught mother. Again, they saw no evidence of foul play. Again, they wrote SIDS on the death certificate. Again, no autopsy was performed. Autumn Dawn Spencer was buried next to her half-sister Joyce. Two babies dead from unexplained causes, same mother, and still no investigation. Because here's the tragic reality. Suffocation is almost impossible to detect in infant deaths. Dr. A. Nabil Salah, a pathologist who would later examine this case, explained, "I can't swear on it, but it's a possibility. There's not much you can find in suffocation, really. Without witnesses, without a confession, without physical evidence, these murders are perfect crimes." Diane Spencer moved to Michigan. She moved to the small town of Wayland in Allegan County. She started a new life. And on March 25, 1990, she gave birth to a son, Aaron Avery Spencer. For 6 months, she cared for Aaron. For 6 months, perhaps she thought things would be different this time. For 6 months, maybe she fought the urges, fought the thoughts, fought whatever darkness lived inside her mind. But on September 25, 1990, that darkness won. 6-month-old Aaron was in his crib. Diane picked up a pillow. She pressed it over her son's face. She held it there, held it while he struggled, held it while he fought for air that wouldn't come, held it until Aaron Avery Spencer became the third infant she'd murdered. This time, Michigan State Trooper John Palmatier responded to the scene. This time, something felt wrong. This time, investigators started asking questions. They discovered Diane had lost 2 other children to SIDS in Pennsylvania. 2 previous SIDS deaths. Now a third suspicious infant death. The odds of that happening naturally? Astronomical. Trooper Palmatier knew he was looking at a serial killer. He brought Diane in for questioning. The interrogation lasted 5 hours. 5 hours of pressure, of questions, of confronting her with the impossible coincidence of 3 dead babies. And finally, Diane Louise Spencer broke. She confessed to everything. She told them about Joyce, how she'd suffocated her with a towel because the baby didn't seem to care about her. She told them about Autumn, how she'd pressed a blanket over her face until she stopped crying. She told them about Aaron, how she'd used a pillow to end his life. She even demonstrated for investigators how she'd held Joyce and Aaron in her arms while killing them, cradling them as if they were precious even as she murdered them. Pennsylvania authorities were notified immediately. They exhumed little Joyce's body from her grave. The death certificates for both Pennsylvania victims were officially changed from SIDS to asphyxiation. Murder. After years of lying in graves marked by natural causes, these babies were finally recognized as homicide victims. On March 13, 1992, Diane Louise Spencer was convicted of first-degree murder for Aaron's death. She was 25 years old. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Pennsylvania charged her with murdering Joyce and Autumn. At a preliminary hearing on October 28, 1992, defense attorney Chip Bell tried desperately to suppress her confessions, arguing that prosecutors couldn't prove a crime occurred independent of her statements. District Justice William Daisher disagreed and ordered her to stand trial. She faced the potential death penalty in Pennsylvania. But then something happened that exposed another kind of horror lurking in Michigan's prison system. On July 31, 1995, Diane was incarcerated at Scott Correctional Facility in Plymouth, Michigan. Guards found her naked, bruised, gagged with a towel, and tied spread eagle to her bed. She'd been sexually assaulted. Correctional Officer David Schwartz pleaded guilty to assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct. He received only 1 year in prison for his crime. This case became part of a Human Rights Watch investigation into systemic sexual abuse at Michigan women's prisons, a scandal that revealed how even convicted killers could become victims within a broken system. Today, Diane Louise Spencer remains incarcerated in Michigan, serving her life sentence without parole. 3 babies are dead. 3 times she held a child close and murdered them. 3 times she got away with it. Until the 4th time that never came, stopped by a Michigan State Trooper who refused to believe in coincidence. The question that haunts this case isn't just how she did it. It's why. What makes a mother capable of looking into her infant's eyes and choosing death? Diane told investigators the babies didn't care about her, that there was no interaction. But the truth is simpler and more disturbing. She killed them because she could. Because they were helpless. Because they couldn't tell anyone what she'd done. Because for 15 years, across 2 states, nobody suspected that SIDS could be spelled MURDER. Case 3. Louise Sine. Murder for money in Bay County. Bay City, Michigan. January 18, 1990. A quiet night in Bangor Township was about to explode into violence, betrayal, and a murder conspiracy that would divide a family and shock the community. This is the story of Louise Sine, a woman who claimed to be a victim of domestic violence, or according to prosecutors, a calculating killer who wanted her husband's $300,000 life insurance policy. The truth depends on who you believe. Louise Sine co-owned a health food store in Bay City with her husband Timothy. They had a daughter together named Jennifer. From the outside, they seemed like a normal family running a small business. But according to Louise, behind closed doors, their marriage was 12 years of hell. She claimed Timothy beat her regularly, broke her bones, terrorized her. She said she called police dozens of times, with no response, no help, no escape. Her story painted Timothy as a monster and herself as a woman driven to desperate measures. Timothy's family tells a completely different story. They describe a man who never raised his hand to anyone, who worked hard, who loved his daughter. Brother Jim Sine was emphatic. There was no violence. This was about greed. Sister Brenda Koroyan stated flatly in 1990, "She has never been beaten. He has never done drugs." Bay County prosecutor Nancy Barushko would later write that Sine's abuse claims have no basis of facts. So who's telling the truth? Was Louise a battered woman driven to murder by a system that failed to protect her? Or was she a cold-blooded killer who saw $300,000 in life insurance money and decided murder was easier than divorce? The evidence suggests the latter. Louise didn't pull the trigger herself. She hired it done. And the plan she orchestrated was brutal. She enlisted James Blau, a 20-year-old employee at their health food store, to find a killer. Blau brought in 18-year-old Sean England as the triggerman. Louise's payment plan: $1,000 in installments and a motorcycle as down payment. The cost of a human life: a used motorcycle and a promise of cash. January 18, 1990. Evening. Timothy Sine was at home in Bangor Township. The attackers arrived. According to testimony from James Blau, what happened next was savage and premeditated. First, a gunshot from outside the house. Timothy was wounded but not killed. The attackers broke into the home. Timothy was down, bleeding, vulnerable. They stood on his back. Sean England placed a double-barreled shotgun to Timothy's neck. He fired once. Reloaded. Fired again. The second shot nearly severed Timothy's arm from his body. This wasn't a quick death. This wasn't a murder made to look like robbery gone wrong. This was execution-style killing, brutal and personal. Timothy Sine died on the floor of his own home while his killers stood over him. The investigation moved quickly. James Blau, the middleman, talked. He testified he'd been paid to arrange the murder. He explained Louise's motive. She wanted the $300,000 life insurance policy, and she knew divorce wouldn't get her that money. She'd filed for divorce shortly before the murder, but that wasn't enough. She wanted it all. So she ordered her husband's death. Louise hired one of Michigan's most prominent defense attorneys, Elbert Hatchett, a legendary civil rights lawyer who would practice until his death in April 2021. Hatchett argued that Blau's testimony couldn't be trusted, that he was lying to save himself. But the prosecution's case was solid. They had Blau's testimony. They had the murder weapon. They had the insurance motive. They had a woman who filed for divorce and then, instead of waiting for it to be finalized, arranged for her husband to be shot to death in their home. On February 19, 1991, Louise Sine was sentenced in Bay County. First-degree premeditated murder. First-degree premeditated murder with conspiracy. The judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences without parole. She would die in prison. James Blau received life with possibility of parole. He was released in 2020 and now runs a dog training business in Saginaw Township. Sean England, the shooter, originally received life without parole, but in June 2024 was re-sentenced to 35 to 60 years. He was released on December 10, 2024. Louise sat in prison for over 30 years. And during those decades, a movement grew. The Michigan Women's Justice and Clemency Project took up her case. They argued she was a battered woman, that she'd suffered 12 years of violence, that police had failed to protect her, that the justice system had failed to recognize her victimization. Her daughter Jennifer, who was 7 years old when Timothy died, became the face of the clemency campaign. Jennifer stated, "I've lived without my mother for over 80% of my life. Her release day will be one of the greatest days of my life." The Sine family fought back. Jim Sine and his sisters insisted Timothy never harmed Louise. They argued this was rewriting history, that Louise was manipulating people in death the same way she'd manipulated them in life. The prosecutor agreed, stating the abuse claims had no basis of facts. On December 16, 2022, Governor Gretchen Whitmer commuted both of Louise's life sentences. In January 2023, the Michigan Parole Board voted to release her. After approximately 32 years and 6 months in prison, Louise Sine walked free with 4 years of parole supervision. Here's what makes this case so complex. We'll never know the complete truth. Did Timothy Sine abuse his wife? Louise says yes. His family says no. Police records from the 1980s don't prove either version. But we do know this for certain. Even if Timothy was abusive, Louise didn't kill him in self-defense. She didn't kill him during an attack. She hired 2 men to break into their home and execute him with a shotgun while standing on his back. That's not self-defense. That's premeditated murder. The clemency decision sparked fierce debate in Michigan. Some saw Louise as a victim who finally got justice. Others saw a convicted killer who manipulated the system one more time. What's undeniable is this. Timothy Sine's family will live forever with the loss of a man they loved. And Jennifer Sine lost her father at age 7 to her mother's choices. Whether those choices were born of desperation or greed, we'll never truly know. Case 4. Anna Marie Buschard. Family conspiracy on a gravel road. Sometimes murder doesn't come from a stranger. Sometimes it's orchestrated by people who claim to love you, planned by family, executed by friends. This is the story of Rodney Fancher, a 24-year-old former U.S. Army serviceman who made the mistake of falling in love with the wrong woman and paying for it with his life on a deserted gravel road in Barry County, Michigan. October 3, 1985. It was a Thursday evening, around 9 o'clock. Rodney "Rod" Fancher lived with his mother Mary on Beulah Street in Lansing. For about 2 years, he'd been dating Cora Buschard. Rod loved Cora. He loved her 2 sons, 6-year-old Brian and 2-year-old Brad, and served as a father figure to them. He was saving money to rent an apartment where they could all live together. He was building a future. He thought Cora's mother, 47-year-old Anna Marie Buschard, approved of the relationship. He thought he was welcome in their family. He was wrong. According to extensive testimony documented in People v. Buschard, Anna Marie Buschard hated Rodney Fancher. She wanted him gone. And in her twisted mind, gone didn't mean broken up with. It meant dead. She allegedly told her daughter Peggy Stevens, simply breaking Fancher's arms and legs would do no good, that he had to be shot. Anna orchestrated an elaborate plan. She posted a fake job notice at Don's truck stop claiming Rodney was looking for work. Then she had 32-year-old Tony Hill, an old friend of her son-in-law Harold Stevens from the Eaton County Workfare program, call Rodney using the fake name Rich Hoover. The story was simple. Hill needed help unloading a truck and would pay $80 cash. For a young man saving money for an apartment, it was an easy gig. Rodney agreed to meet. Anna promised to pay Hill $1,000 in installments. She gave him a motorcycle as down payment. $1,000 and a motorcycle. That was the price she put on Rodney Fancher's life. October 3, 1985, evening. Rodney Fancher drove to meet Rich Hoover at a Potterville bar. Hill met him there. They talked. Rodney felt comfortable enough to get into Hill's car. As they drove, Rodney talked openly about his future with Cora, about his dreams, about the life he was building. He had no idea he was talking to his executioner. Hill drove to a deserted gravel road near Nashville, Michigan. He asked Rodney to step out of the car to smoke some weed. Rodney got out. They stood together in the darkness on that lonely road. Then Tony Hill raised a sawed-off shotgun and fired at close range. The blast hit Rodney in the chest. He fell. As Rodney lay dying, Hill allegedly told him, "This was the way she wanted it done." Anna wanted him to know. In his final moments, Rodney Fancher learned the truth, that the mother of the woman he loved had ordered his execution. Then Hill got back in his car and drove away, leaving Rodney's body on the gravel road like discarded trash. The next day, October 4th, a farmer discovered the body. Michigan State Police Sergeant Millett Holton processed the scene. He found plastic wadding in the fatal chest wound. Through meticulous forensic work, Holton matched that wadding to the jagged barrel of a sawed-off shotgun borrowed from a man in Charlotte. The physical evidence was solid. The question was, who pulled the trigger and why? The investigation led to Anna Marie Bushard, Tony Hill, and Harold Stevens, Anna's son-in-law, married to her daughter Peggy. Harold, nicknamed Snake, reportedly resented Fancher's relationship with Peggy's nephew Brian. But the key witness was Peggy Jean Stevens herself, Anna's daughter. Prosecutors granted her full immunity in exchange for testimony. She told investigators everything. How her mother had suggested the fake job posting, how Tony Hill had agreed to be the shooter, how the plan unfolded step by step. She testified that Anna had said Rodney needed to be shot, that breaking his limbs wouldn't be enough. The trials began in May 1986. On May 5th through 9th, in Eaton County Circuit Court, prosecutor Jeffrey L. Sauter presented the state's case. The evidence was overwhelming. Both Bushard and Hill were found guilty. But Anna's legal team successfully argued for a new trial based on a court error. She was tried again. She was convicted again. On June 12, 1986, sentences were handed down. Anna Marie Bushard, life imprisonment. Tony Hill, mandatory non-parolable life, plus 40 to 60 years for conspiracy to be served concurrently. In September 1986, Harold Stevens received life imprisonment. Anna appealed. Her lawyers argued the conviction violated her Fifth Amendment rights, that forcing her to testify after her cellmate's testimony constituted double jeopardy. On January 11, 1991, the Michigan Court of Appeals affirmed her conviction. On September 29, 1993, the Michigan Supreme Court agreed. Her conviction was final. But the story doesn't end there. On December 13, 2022, the Michigan Parole Board held a public hearing to consider commuting Anna's sentence. After nearly 40 years in prison, after orchestrating the murder of a young man whose only crime was loving her daughter, Anna Marie Bushard was being considered for clemency. The hearing brought back all the pain for Fancher's family. They remembered Rod, 24 years old, former Army, working hard, saving money, planning a future. They remembered how he treated Brian and Brad like his own sons. They remembered how he died, shot in the chest on a dark gravel road, told in his final moments that this was what Anna wanted. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the cold calculation behind it. This wasn't a crime of passion. Anna didn't catch Rodney hurting her daughter or grandchildren. She simply didn't want him around. She didn't like him dating Cora. So she orchestrated an elaborate scheme involving fake job postings, false identities, and hired killers. She turned her own family into accomplices. She paid a man to murder someone who was trying to become part of her family. Tony Hill is still in prison serving mandatory life without parole. Harold Stevens is still incarcerated. Anna Marie Bushard remains behind bars. Her life sentence a testament to a crime so senseless, so calculated, that even after nearly 40 years, the justice system continues to say, this woman deserves to stay locked away. Rodney Fancher died thinking he was meeting someone for a simple job. He died talking about his dreams. He died because a mother decided he wasn't good enough for her family. And he died on a lonely gravel road with the knowledge that the woman he'd trusted, the grandmother of children he'd helped raise, had ordered his execution. Case 5. Kathy Wood, death in the nursing home. Alpine Manor Nursing Home in Walker, Michigan, a suburb of Grand Rapids, seemed like any other care facility in the mid-1980s. Elderly patients with Alzheimer's disease and dementia lived out their final years in what was supposed to be a safe, caring environment. Families trusted Alpine Manor to protect their most vulnerable loved ones. But in the first 4 months of 1987, something terrible was happening in the halls of Alpine Manor. Something no one suspected. Patients were being murdered, and the killers wore nurses' aid uniforms. Catherine Maywood was born on March 7, 1962, in Soap Lake, Washington. By 1979, At just 17 years old, she was pregnant and married to Ken Wood. She gave birth to a daughter, Jackie. The marriage didn't last, but Kathy kept the last name Wood. In July 1985, she was hired at Alpine Manor and quickly promoted to supervisor of nurses' aides. She was responsible for overseeing care for some of the facility's most vulnerable patients. People trusted her. That trust was about to be betrayed in the most horrific way imaginable. In fall 1986, a new nurse's aide was hired. Her name was Gwendolyn Graham. She'd moved from Tyler, Texas to Michigan and needed work. Kathy Wood became her supervisor. By September 1986, they'd become lovers. By January 1987, they'd become something far darker, serial killers. According to Wood's later testimony, the murders served as a love bond between the two women. Each killing represented a day, in the phrase, "I will love you forever and a day." They initially tried to select victims whose first initials would spell out the word murder, but when their early targets fought back, they abandoned the plan and instead chose the weakest, most defenseless patients they could find. The victims were elderly women with dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Women who couldn't fight back. Women who couldn't tell anyone what was happening. Women whose deaths would be easily explained as natural causes in a nursing home population. Victim 1, Marguerite Chambers, 60 years old. She'd lived with Alzheimer's disease for approximately 14 years. On January 18, 1987, Gwendolyn Graham smothered her while Kathy Wood stood watch. Marguerite became the first day in their twisted forever and a day. Victim 2, Myrtle Luce, 95 years old, suffering from dementia. On February 10, 1987, Graham smothered her while Wood served as lookout. Another day, another murder. Another victim whose death was written off as natural. Victim 3, Mae Mason, 79 years old, with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. February 16, 1987. The method was always the same. Graham would press a washcloth or pillow over the victim's face while Wood made sure no one interrupted. Mae died in her bed, and no one suspected murder. Victim 4, Belle Burkhard, 74 years old, dementia. February 26, 1987. By this point, the killing had become routine. Graham and Wood had perfected their system. They knew how long it took. They knew how to avoid detection. They knew these elderly patients with dementia wouldn't be able to report what was happening even if they survived an attempt. Victim 5, Edith Cook, 97 or 98 years old, suffering from dementia and gangrene. April 7, 1987. The final confirmed victim. Investigators would later believe there may have been 8 to 12 victims total, but only 5 could be confirmed. According to Wood's testimony, Graham took souvenirs from the victims, jewelry, dentures, personal items. She kept them to relive the murders, to remember each victim, to celebrate each killing. It was a ritual, a game, a twisted expression of their relationship. For 18 months, the murders remained secret. Gwendolyn Graham and Kathy Wood continued working at Alpine Manor. They went on with their lives. The families of their victims mourned natural deaths. And then, in October 1988, Kathy Wood's ex-husband Ken made a phone call that would blow the case wide open. On October 7, 1988, 14 months after the murders stopped, Ken Wood contacted Walker Police. He told them his ex-wife had confessed to involvement in multiple homicides at Alpine Manor. He told them she described being a lookout while her girlfriend smothered elderly patients. He told them details only someone involved could know. Lead detectives Roger Kaliniak and Tom Freeman began one of the most difficult investigations of their careers. They brought Kathy Wood in for questioning. Initially, she minimized her role, claiming she was only a lookout, that Graham did all the killing, that she'd tried to stop it. She failed a polygraph when she claimed minimal involvement. Under continued interrogation, she finally admitted the truth. She and Graham had plotted at least 5 murders together. They were partners in every sense of the word. But there was a problem. A big problem. The prosecutors needed physical evidence, and in suffocation cases, physical evidence is almost impossible to find. They exhumed the bodies of Marguerite Chambers and Edith Cook, the only 2 victims who hadn't been cremated. The examinations yielded nothing. No physical evidence of homicide. No trauma. No signs of suffocation. In elderly, frail patients with dementia, suffocation leaves no trace. The Kent County medical examiner had a choice: rely on the confessions or rule the deaths natural. Based on the detailed confessions from Kathy Wood, the medical examiner ruled the deaths homicides. It was a controversial decision, ruling deaths murders based solely on confession, with zero physical evidence. But what else could they do? Let serial killers walk free? On December 4th and 5th, 1988, both women were arrested. Both were charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and conspiracy. But the prosecution had a problem. Without physical evidence, they needed Kathy Wood's testimony to convict Gwendolyn Graham. So they offered Wood a deal. The plea agreement was controversial then and remains controversial now. Kathy Wood pleaded guilty to 1 count of second-degree murder for Marguerite Chambers's death and 1 count of conspiracy to commit second-degree murder. In exchange for her testimony against Graham, she received 20 to 40 years instead of mandatory life. On October 11, 1989, she was sentenced. She would be eligible for parole in March 2005, after serving just 15 years for her role in killing at least 5 helpless elderly women. The deal outraged many people. Retired Detective Roger Kaliniak would later state, "I believe that Kathy Wood was the mastermind. She was the one that was pulling strings on Gwendolyn Graham." Journalist Lowell Cauffiel's 1992 book Forever and 5 Days presented evidence suggesting Wood wasn't the manipulated follower she claimed to be. She was the dominant partner, the instigator, possibly the true mastermind behind the murders. But the deal was done. Wood had her plea agreement. Now it was time to use her testimony to convict Graham. And that trial would reveal even more disturbing details about these murders and the women who committed them. Case 6. Gwendolyn Graham, the unrepentant killer. The trial of Gwendolyn Gail Graham began in 1989 in Kent County Circuit Court. While Kathy Wood had taken a plea deal, Graham maintained her innocence. She claimed the entire story was an elaborate mind game invented by Wood. She denied ever killing anyone. She denied the love bond, the souvenirs, the planning. She insisted she was innocent. But the prosecution had Kathy Wood's testimony. And they had something even more damning. Testimony from Graham's new girlfriend, Heather Beauregard. After her relationship with Wood ended, Graham had begun dating Beauregard. And according to Beauregard's testimony, Graham had confessed to 5 killings. She'd told Beauregard details about the murders. She described the victims. She'd essentially confirmed everything Wood had said. The evidence painted a picture of Gwendolyn Graham that was deeply disturbing. Born August 6, 1963, in California, she'd been raised in Tyler, Texas. Her childhood was troubled. She alleged her father sexually abused her, allegations he denied and that were never proven. She claimed her father forbade her mother from holding her, believing it would make her weak. In one horrific incident, her brother killed her pet dog on their father's orders. Graham exhumed the dog's bones and kept its teeth in a heart-shaped box, a macabre keepsake that foreshadowed her later collection of victims' belongings. She engaged in self-harm throughout her teens, burning herself, cutting herself. She was eventually diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. By the time she arrived at Alpine Manor in fall 1986, Graham was a troubled young woman looking for connection, for love, for something to make her feel alive. She found all that in Kathy Wood. And together, they found it in murder. The trial lasted several weeks. The prosecution presented 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. They argued Graham was the hands-on killer, the one who physically smothered each victim. They presented Wood's testimony, Beauregard's testimony, and circumstantial evidence including the victims' medical records and the timeline of deaths. The defense argued this was all fantasy, a sick story concocted by Kathy Wood to get back at an ex-girlfriend. They pointed to the lack of physical evidence. They emphasized that without Wood's testimony, there was no case. They tried to create reasonable doubt. On November 3, 1989, the jury returned its verdict, guilty on all charges. Gwendolyn Graham was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced her to 5 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. At age 26, Graham would never again see the outside of a prison. She was sent to Women's Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where she remains today, over 30 years later. Unlike Kathy Wood, who was paroled in 2020 after serving nearly 30 years, Graham will die in prison. Her crimes are too heinous, her lack of remorse too complete, her danger to society too great to ever consider release. In a 2019 prison interview, Graham spoke about the case for what may be the last time publicly. She described Kathy Wood as evil. She insisted, she thought it was a game, and she won, and in the end, she'll win. If I die here, and she's walking around free, she'll win. Most disturbingly, she maintained, after all these years, I still don't believe that anybody was murdered. I just don't. Even after 30 years in prison, even after being convicted by a jury, even after multiple appeals were denied, Gwendolyn Graham refuses to admit she killed anyone. This denial raises profound questions. Is she truly delusional, actually believing no murders occurred? Or is this the final manipulation, the last attempt to maintain some control over a narrative she can't escape? What we know for certain is this: 5 elderly women are dead. Marguerite Chambers, Myrtle Luce, Mae Mason, Belle Burkhard, and Edith Cook. All vulnerable, all helpless, all suffocated by someone they should have been able to trust. Their families buried them thinking they died naturally in their sleep. It took months before anyone realized these weren't natural deaths. It took over a year before anyone was arrested. And it took a calculated plea deal to ensure at least one of the killers served serious time. The Alpine Manor case exposed horrifying vulnerabilities in nursing home care. How easy is it for staff members to kill patients? How many deaths are written off as natural when they're actually murder? How do we protect people who can't protect themselves, who can't report abuse, who can't tell us what's happening behind closed doors? Today, Kathy Wood lives in Fort Mill, South Carolina. She was released in January 2020 after nearly 30 years in prison. She's prohibited from working with the elderly, children, or vulnerable adults. She's free to live her life, to walk down streets, to make choices. Meanwhile, Gwendolyn Graham sits in a cell in Ypsilanti, serving 5 consecutive life sentences, insisting to this day that no one was ever murdered. And the families of 5 women, Marguerite, Myrtle, Mae, Belle, and Edith, live with the knowledge that their mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers didn't die peacefully in their sleep. They were murdered, suffocated by nurses who were supposed to care for them, killed as part of a twisted love bond between 2 women who found intimacy in death. The Alpine Manor murders remain one of Michigan's most disturbing cases, a reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like caregivers. Case 7. Dolores Kapuscinski, 17 years of hell. Not every woman who kills is a cold-blooded murderer. Sometimes, murder is born from desperation. Sometimes, it's the final act of a woman who's tried everything else and found no help, no escape, no justice. This is the story of Dolores Kapuscinski, a woman who claimed 17 years of physical and sexual abuse, a woman who said the night of the murder she just snapped. But in Michigan in 1988, that explanation wasn't enough to save her from a life sentence. Dolores Kapuscinski married her husband Thomas sometime around 1970. For 17 years, according to her testimony and according to advocates from the Michigan Women's Justice and Clemency Project, she endured sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse. She claimed her husband brutalized her regularly. She claimed she lived in fear. She claimed she tried to get help and found none. Then, in 1987, somewhere near Rockford in Kent County, Michigan, Thomas Kapuscinski died. The specific details of how he died remain limited in public records. This was a pre-digital era case, and much documentation has been lost to time. What we know is this: Dolores killed her husband. The question is, was she a murderer or a victim who saw no other way out? Michigan law in the 1980s made it extraordinarily difficult for battered women to defend themselves in court. In 1995, the Michigan Supreme Court's decision in People v. Crystal severely restricted expert testimony on battered woman syndrome. Experts could testify generally about the syndrome, but couldn't connect it to specific defendants' behavior. This created an impossible situation. A woman could prove she was battered, and experts could explain why battered women sometimes kill, but connecting those 2 facts was prohibited. Juries were left to make the connection themselves, and often, they didn't. Dolores was charged with first-degree murder. Her trial proceeded in 1988. The prosecution argued premeditated murder. The defense argued years of abuse, desperation, and a woman who'd exhausted all other options. On the night Thomas died, Dolores claimed she just snapped, years of trauma culminating in one violent act. The jury didn't buy it. Or perhaps more accurately, Michigan law didn't allow them to fully consider it. In September 1988, Dolores Kopyschinsky was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life, without parole. At approximately 38 years old, she was told she would die in prison. But her story didn't end there. The Michigan Women's Justice and Clemency Project took up her case. This organization advocates for women who killed abusive partners, arguing the justice system fails to recognize the realities of domestic violence. They point to stark sentencing disparities. Men who kill intimate partners average 2 to 6 years. Women who kill intimate partners average 15 years. And an Oakland County study from 1986 to 1988 found that white female defendants who killed white victims averaged 10 to 30 years. But if the woman was a domestic violence victim, the predicted sentence was life. Think about that for a moment. Being a domestic violence victim didn't reduce your sentence. It increased it. The system essentially punished women more severely for killing their abusers than for killing strangers. The logic was backwards. If you claimed abuse, you must have been planning to kill him all along. Premeditation. First-degree murder. Life without parole. Dolores's first clemency petition was filed sometime in the mid-1990s, after Violet Allen's case. Governor John Engler denied it. Dolores remained in prison. Years passed. Decades passed. By July 2017, 29 years after her conviction, Dolores was approximately 67 years old. She'd spent nearly 3 decades in prison. She'd lived more of her life behind bars than she'd lived as a free woman. In July 2017, she finally received a clemency hearing. She told her story again. 17 years of abuse. A husband who hurt her sexually and physically. A system that didn't protect her. A night when something inside her broke, and she fought back. She asked for mercy, for understanding, for recognition that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't a cold-blooded killer but a desperate woman who saw no other way out. As of the most recent reports, Dolores has had multiple clemency hearings. A decision from Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office remains pending. After more than 3 decades in prison, Dolores Kopyschinsky's fate still hangs in the balance. Will she die in prison for killing her abuser? Or will she finally receive the clemency she's been seeking for over 30 years? This case raises uncomfortable questions about justice, about domestic violence, about how we treat women who kill. If Dolores was truly abused for 17 years, if she truly had no way out, if the system truly failed to protect her, does she deserve life without parole? Or should we recognize that sometimes, murder is born not from evil but from desperation? On the other hand, we only have Dolores's word that Thomas was abusive. We don't have police reports documenting years of calls for help. We don't have medical records showing injuries. We don't have witnesses who saw Thomas hurt Dolores. The Michigan Women's Justice and Clemency Project believes her. The jury that convicted her didn't. The truth is, we may never know for certain what happened in the Kopyschinsky home during those 17 years. We may never know if Dolores was a victim who killed her abuser or a killer who invented an abuse story to justify murder. What we do know is this: a man is dead, a woman is serving life without parole, and the question of justice remains unanswered after more than 30 years. Case 8. Hope Melton, the Centerville Mystery. Sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite extensive research, despite searching through archives and court records and newspaper databases, some cases remain frustratingly out of reach. This is one of those cases. We know a child died. We know her mother killed her. But beyond those bare facts, the story of Hope Melton and 7-year-old Talicia Melton remains largely a mystery. Centerville, Michigan. Population under 2,000. The county seat of St. Joseph County in southwestern Michigan. A small town where everyone knows everyone. The kind of place where tragedy doesn't stay secret for long. In 1995, something terrible happened in Centerville. A mother killed her daughter. But the details of what happened, how it happened, why it happened, those details are lost to time. What we know comes from the official Domestic and Sexual Abuse Services Memorial List, maintained for Southwest Michigan domestic violence vigils since at least 2019. The memorial states simply, Talicia Melton, 7 years old, from Centerville, 1995, killed by her mother, Hope Melton. 7 years old. Old enough to go to school, to have friends, to have a personality, to be a full human being with thoughts and dreams and hopes. And then, in 1995, Talicia's life ended at the hands of the person who should have protected her most, her mother. We don't know the exact date of Talicia's death. We don't know the method. Was she beaten? Neglected? Suffocated? Stabbed? Shot? We don't know. We don't know what led to her death. Was Hope Melton mentally ill? Was she abusing drugs? Was there a history of violence in the home? Had Child Protective Services been involved? We don't know. We don't know if there was a trial. We don't know if Hope pleaded guilty or was convicted by a jury. We don't know what sentence she received. Is she still in prison? Was she released years ago? Is she alive or dead? We simply don't know. The challenges in researching this case highlight broader issues with criminal justice documentation in Michigan during the 1990s. This case predates widespread internet documentation. Local newspaper archives, the Three Rivers Commercial News, the Sturgis Sentinel, from this era aren't digitized. The Detroit Free Press, Michigan's major newspaper, was on strike from July 1995 through January 1996, affecting regional coverage of cases that would normally have been reported statewide. St. Joseph County Circuit Court records from 1995 would contain the full story: charges, trial transcripts, sentencing details, appeals. But those records aren't accessible online. They sit in filing cabinets in the courthouse, available only to researchers who travel to St. Joseph County and request them in person. What makes the Melton case even more disturbing is its proximity to another case in this list, the Lady Monique Conley case. Centerville and Three Rivers are only about 5 miles apart. In 1994, 3-year-old Lady Monique Conley died of asphyxiation in Three Rivers, killed by her parents. In 1995, 7-year-old Talicia Melton died in Centerville, killed by her mother Hope. 2 small towns. 2 child fatalities. 2 mothers involved. Within 1 year of each other. This concentration of documented child fatalities in St. Joseph County during 1994 to 1995 raises troubling questions. Was there something happening in this rural Michigan county that made it particularly dangerous for children? Were these isolated incidents? Or were there more cases we haven't found? Were there systemic failures in child protection services? Were there warning signs that were missed? We may never know the answers. The Melton case remains documented only by its inclusion on a domestic violence memorial list. Talicia Melton's name is there, along with dozens of other victims. But unlike many of the other cases on that list, Talicia's story hasn't been told. The details haven't been preserved. The record is incomplete. Somewhere, Hope Melton knows what happened. Somewhere, there may be family members, friends, neighbors who remember. Somewhere in the St. Joseph County Courthouse, there are records that would answer our questions. But for now, all we can do is remember Talicia Melton, 7 years old, from Centerville, killed by her mother in 1995. A child whose story deserves to be told, but remains frustratingly out of reach. Case 9, Lady Monique Conley, asphyxiation in Three Rivers. In November 1994, in the small town of Three Rivers, Michigan, 3-year-old Lady Monique Conley died. The cause of death was asphyxiation. Both of her parents were convicted in connection with her death. This is another case where the full story remains elusive, hidden in court records that haven't been digitized, in newspapers that haven't been archived online, in the memories of people who may no longer want to remember. Like the Melton case, we know the Conley case is real because of its inclusion on the DOS's memorial list, and because it appears in Michigan court records. Specifically, the case file was among those sought in the legal battle Detroit Free Press versus Family Independence Agency, documented in the Michigan Court of Appeals decision at 258 Michigan Appeals 544, decided in 2003. This case involved media organizations fighting to obtain records from Michigan's Child Welfare Agency. The Family Independence Agency initially denied release of records related to child death cases, arguing the information was inextricably specific to siblings of the children, and therefore protected. The circuit court disagreed and ordered release of several files, including Lady Monique Conley's. What this tells us is significant. Lady Monique's death wasn't just a criminal case. It was also a child welfare case, meaning the Family Independence Agency had been involved with the family at some point before her death. This suggests there may have been prior reports of abuse or neglect, prior interventions, prior opportunities to save this little girl's life. 3 years old. That's barely older than a toddler. At 3, children are just learning to express themselves, just developing their personalities, just beginning to understand the world. Lady Monique Conley should have been playing, learning, growing. Instead, in November 1994, she died of asphyxiation. Asphyxiation means she couldn't breathe. She was denied oxygen until her brain shut down and her heart stopped. How does a 3-year-old die of asphyxiation? There are several possibilities, all of them horrifying. She could have been smothered, a hand over her mouth and nose, or a pillow pressed against her face. She could have been choked, hands around her throat, squeezing until she stopped breathing. She could have been confined in a small space without adequate air. She could have been the victim of positional asphyxiation, held in a position that prevented her from breathing properly. Any of these scenarios means Lady Monique died slowly. She struggled. She fought for air that wouldn't come. She was conscious for at least part of her death, aware that she couldn't breathe, terrified, looking for help that didn't arrive. And her parents, both of them, were responsible. The fact that both parents were convicted suggests this wasn't a case where one parent killed the child while the other was unaware. This was either a joint action or a situation where one parent acted and the other failed to intervene, failed to protect, failed to save their daughter's life. In the eyes of the law, both were equally culpable. We don't know their sentences. We don't know if they're still in prison. We don't know if they showed remorse, if they claimed it was an accident, if they tried to blame each other. We don't know if there were other children in the home, children who witnessed what happened to Lady Monique. What we do know is that somewhere in St. Joseph County, in November 1994, a 3-year-old girl died a terrifying death, and both of her parents were held responsible. The people who brought her into the world, who were supposed to love her and protect her, instead became the instruments of her death. The geographic and temporal proximity of the Conley and Melton cases, 5 miles apart, 1 year apart, both in rural St. Joseph County, suggests a disturbing pattern. Was there something unique about this area during the mid-1990s that led to these child fatalities? Were there economic stressors? Drug problems? Failures in the child welfare system? We don't know. But the pattern is there, documented in memorial lists and court records, waiting for someone with access to the original files to tell the full story. For now, Lady Monique Conley remains another name on a memorial list. Another child victim. Another case where the details are incomplete, but the tragedy is absolute. 3 years old. Asphyxiated. Parents convicted. That's all we know. That's all the record tells us. But it's enough to know that justice failed this little girl long before she died. Case 10. Nancy and Jurwatowski. 27 years to justice. Some murders are solved immediately. The killer is caught at the scene, or arrested within hours, or identified within days. But some murders remain cold for years, even decades. The killer goes free, living a normal life, believing they've gotten away with it. Until one day, advances in technology catch up with them. This is the story of Baby Garnet, an infant found dead in an outhouse in 1997, and Nancy and Jurwatowski, the mother who wouldn't be identified for 27 years. June 1st, 1997. Somewhere in Newberry, Michigan, a small town in the Upper Peninsula, 33-year-old Nancy Jurwatowski went into labor. She was alone. Whether she chose to be alone or had no choice, we don't know. What we know is that she delivered a baby girl without medical assistance. The infant was full-term or near-term, gestational age estimated at 36 to 42 weeks. A healthy baby. A baby who, with proper medical care, would have survived. But Nancy didn't call for help. She didn't go to a hospital. She didn't seek medical assistance. According to prosecutors, the baby died of asphyxiation, a death that was preventable with medical intervention. Whether Nancy actively killed the infant or simply allowed her to die through neglect, the result was the same. A newborn baby girl took her first breaths and her last within hours of each other. Then Nancy did something even more disturbing. She wrapped up the infant's body, got in her car, and drove approximately 20 miles to Garnet Lake Campground in Hudson Township, Mackinac County. The campground had pit toilets, outhouses with waste tanks underneath. Nancy found one of these outhouses, opened it, and concealed her baby's body in the waste tank. For 25 days, the infant's body lay hidden in human waste. Then, on June 26, 1997, campground workers were cleaning the outhouses. They used a suction machine to empty the waste tanks. The machine clogged. When workers investigated, they discovered why. An infant's body was caught in the machinery. The Mackinac County Sheriff's Office and Michigan State Police launched an immediate investigation. They had a dead infant. They had no idea who the mother was. They searched for leads. They interviewed people. They investigated hospital records, looking for women who'd been pregnant and then suddenly weren't. They found nothing. No viable leads. No suspects. No answers. The case went cold. The infant was buried, given the posthumous name Baby Garnet, after the lake where she was found. Investigators never forgot her, but as years passed, the likelihood of solving the case seemed to diminish. By 2017, 20 years after Baby Garnet's death, the trail was ice cold. But then something changed. Advances in forensic genetic genealogy were revolutionizing cold case investigations. Cases that had been unsolvable for decades were suddenly being cracked using DNA technology combined with genealogy databases. A Michigan State Police detective sergeant decided to reopen Baby Garnet's case. In 2020, Baby Garnet's remains were sent to a private lab for DNA analysis. The lab developed a DNA profile from the 23-year-old remains. That profile was compared against genealogy databases, looking for familial connections. And in 2022, 25 years after Baby Garnet's death, they got a hit. The connection led to a woman who'd submitted her DNA to Family Tree DNA for genealogy purposes. She had no idea her DNA test would help solve a murder. She had no idea she was related to a dead infant found in an outhouse. She had no idea her grandmother was about to be arrested for murder. Nancy and Jerwatowski had moved from Michigan to Pinedale, Wyoming, sometime after 1997. She'd lived there for years, building a life, far from the scene of her crime. When police contacted her in Wyoming, she allegedly admitted to being Baby Garnet's mother. The secret she'd kept for 27 years was finally exposed. In 2024, Nancy was charged with open murder, which carries a potential life sentence, as well as involuntary manslaughter and concealing the death of an individual. The charges were filed in Michigan, and Nancy was extradited back to face justice. On May 10, 2024, she appeared in 92nd District Court in St. Ignace before Judge Beth and Gibson for a preliminary examination. Judge Gibson bound her over for trial in the 11th Circuit Court in Mackinac County. Nancy was released on bond with a GPS tether while awaiting trial. The investigation also identified Baby Garnet's father, but police determined he was unaware of the pregnancy and had no knowledge of what Nancy had done. He was considered a victim, not a suspect. For 27 years, he'd had a daughter and never knew it. For 27 years, that daughter had been dead and he had no idea she'd ever existed. As of now, Nancy's trial is pending. She hasn't been convicted. Unlike the other 9 cases in this documentary, this case occurred within our time frame, 1990 to 1999, but hasn't yet been adjudicated. Nancy is presumed innocent until proven guilty. But if the evidence presented at trial matches what police have described, then Baby Garnet's 27-year wait for justice is finally coming to an end. This case demonstrates the power of modern forensic technology. DNA that was useless in 1997 became the key to solving the case in 2022. Genealogy databases that didn't exist when Baby Garnet died became the tool that identified her killer. Technology caught up with Nancy Jerwatowski. Time caught up with her. And a baby who died nameless in 1997 finally got a name, a story, and justice. Baby Garnet, born June 1, 1997, died the same day. Found June 26, 1997. Justice pending, 2025. 28 years later, a mother will finally answer for what she did to her daughter in a house in Newberry and an outhouse at Garnet Lake. 10 women. 10 crimes. 1 decade. From Sharee Miller's internet manipulation to Diane Spencer's serial infanticide. From the Alpine Manor nursing home murders to Anna Bushard's family conspiracy. From women who claimed to be victims of domestic violence to women who preyed on the helpless. 10 different motives. 10 different methods. 10 different outcomes. What these cases reveal about Michigan in the 1990s is disturbing. They expose systemic failures in protecting battered women like Louise and Dolores Kapuscinski. They reveal how easily suffocation murders can go undetected, as Diane Spencer and the Alpine Manor killers proved. They show the emerging power of digital evidence in the Sharee Miller case and genetic genealogy in the Baby Garnett case. They demonstrate the vulnerability of those who can't protect themselves: infants, elderly patients with dementia, children. But they also reveal something darker about human nature itself. These weren't all monsters. Some were mothers who'd been abused. Some were women who'd been failed by the system. Some claimed desperation drove them to murder. Others showed cold calculation and manipulation. The line between victim and perpetrator, between justice and vengeance, between murder and self-defense. These cases force us to examine where that line lies and who gets to draw it. As of today, Sharee Miller sits in prison serving life. Diane Spencer serves life without parole. Louise walked free after 32 years. Anna Bouchard remains incarcerated awaiting potential clemency. Kathy Wood was released in 2020. Gwendolyn Graham will die in prison. Dolores Kapuscinski's clemency petition awaits decision. Hope Melton's fate is unknown. The Conley parent's status is undocumented. And Nancy Jurwatowski awaits trial. Presumed innocent, but facing the weight of 27 years of secrets. These are Michigan's deadliest mothers of the 1990s. Their stories aren't simple. Their crimes aren't easily explained. But they're documented, they're real, and they changed Michigan's criminal justice system forever. 10 women. 10 crimes. 10 reminders that evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it looks like a bookkeeper, a nurse's aide, a mother. Sometimes the most dangerous person is the one you'd never suspect. This is their story. These are their crimes. This is justice, however imperfect, however delayed, however complex. This is what happens when mothers kill.